Nosk here. Francesca Ramsey's Decoded series on the MTV News YouTube channel sure is a hotbed of social justice narratives, so it wasn't much of a surprise when they put out a video titled, "Are Cracker, White Trash, and Redneck Racist?" So let's delve into this nonsense a bit and inject some much-needed reason.
Are the terms cracker, white trash, and redneck racist?
Yes. You can't just have like a 10-second video. What the hell is wrong with you? It's such a stupid question, though. What do you honestly expect me to... I expect you to sit there and do it right. Hear the arguments. Provide commentary. Refute the claims... Fine. Here we go, I guess.
I wonder who came up with these phrases.
The origins of the terms don't matter. It matters how they're used and applied today. Oh, but please feel free to go on, Francesca, and enlighten us.
Often when we talk about white privilege, a common rebuttal is, I can't be privileged, I grew up poor, or tell that to a homeless person.
This probably has something to do with the fact that privilege is, in and of itself, primarily a class issue these days. As the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it, privilege is a right or benefit that is given to some people and not to others, which in a society like ours really isn't a thing anymore, as we have established laws against such things. Does the term equal opportunity ring a bell? The only part that could apply today would be the benefit side of it, since as an issue of class, upper classes and wealthier groups have the benefit of enjoying things the poor do not, such as better food, entertainment, healthcare, lawyers, etc. A special opportunity to do something that makes you proud. This one is honestly rather nonsensical, as the entire basis for it is reliant on a personal feeling. It's not a societal issue. It's a personal and subjective one, as anyone can be proud of anything they choose to. The advantage that wealthy and powerful people have over other people in a society. See earlier comment. Wealth always has been and always will be the single, overwhelmingly greatest factor in determining advantages and benefits. You know, privilege. You know what seems to be missing here? Race. Funny how that works, isn't it?
But being disadvantaged in one area doesn't negate privilege in others. White privilege doesn't erase the existence of poor white people or the challenges they face due to their class.
Because as we have already established, privilege is a class issue, not a racial issue. Privilege is most heavily associated with wealth, and last I checked, the color of one's skin does not predetermine how much wealth a person has. If you're rich, you're rich. If you're poor, you're poor. If you're poor, you can become rich. If you're rich, you can become poor. And the color of a person's skin does not determine how many benefits or difficulties one experiences due to their wealth or lack thereof.
Nor do discussions of white privilege erase the harmful stereotypes about being poor and white.
It does seem to do a good job of dismissing poor white people and their struggles, however. Why recognize them and their difficulties when you can just say, white privilege, and sweep them under the rug? Discussing white privilege doesn't erase these people. It just gives you an excuse to never consider them in the first place.
Take, for example, the terms cracker, white trash, or redneck. All of these terms have been aggressively used by a white upper class to insult a white underclass. While these terms have become racialized over time, they have a classist origin that goes way back.
Of course they do, because as previously noted, privilege is an issue of class, not of race, and as so, has always been the case through the entire history of civilization. The privileged, wealthy, and upper class will always generally look down their noses at and degrade those who are of a lower class than themselves. I do have to point out, however, how the first thing you ask us in this video is,
are the terms cracker, white trash, and redneck racist?
You then said a moment ago,
while these terms have become racialized over time,
I think we have our answer already. That was fun. No, the whole thing, Nosk. God damn it. Moving on then.
Let's start with cracker.
I have some blueberry goat cheese that would go well with some. Adding those to the grocery list.
While linguistic history is always murky, recent research has shown that in the 16 and 1700s, British aristocrats used cracker as a shortened version of cracked brains, or idle-headed, to disparage lower-class people as dumb and lazy.
We keep coming back to how privilege is a class issue and not a racial one. When will you get around to actually answering the question you posed at the beginning of this video? Oh, wait. You already have.
While these terms have become racialized over time,
Racialized then, still racialized today, therefore racist. This next part doesn't even address the issue of what this video is asking and just reinforces the problem of class rather than race, so we'll zip right through.
it was all about them being poor, not about them being white. Hashtag historical context matters.
Hashtag historical context is cute. Hashtag modern context is the issue though. Hashtag you bumbling tard.
The term was later used by African American slaves and Northern sympathizers as a shortened version of whip cracker, in reference to the whip-wielding plantation workers. So yes, the word cracker was racialized, but the slaves weren't oppressing poor white people by using the term because they were still slaves. Hashtag historical context still matters.
If you want us all to jump in our time machines in a one-way trip back to the 18th and early 19th centuries, then this would be of importance to the use and applications of the words as they were back in those times. But since I can't fit everyone in my time machine, then the present and modern use, application, and racialization of this word, as well as the other two on this list, are the concern and not the historical context. Hashtag pull your head out of your ass. Hashtag modern context is the issue though. Hashtag still a bumbling tard.
White trash shows up next. It's believed to have originated in Baltimore in the 1820s as a way for Southern house slaves to disparage poor whites.
So you're already saying this one is racialized, and therefore racist, because I'm pretty sure I just heard you say,
as a way for Southern house slaves to disparage poor whites.
Being that the term seems to have begun as one used by blacks as disparaging and degrading towards whites, and since you seem to be so fond of hashtag historical context matters, then by your own logic, it's not different than the term nigger, a term initially used by whites to disparage and degrade blacks. Hashtag historical context correlates.
But it gained popularity in the 1850s as a catch-all phrase that replaced other weird old-timey insults for poor whites, such as sandhillers and clay eaters.
Hashtag sandhillers. I'm bringing it back.
White trash was stigmatizing and meant to draw a line between real white people who owned the best land and people and the riffraff who lived on wastelands.
As you so aptly described it earlier, however, it was a racialized term used by blacks to disparage and insult poor whites. Racialized, and it's still used to this day in the same or very similar manner, so still racialized, therefore racist.
Redneck fits in with these terms too. Appearing in the late 1800s, it was used to insult farmers in the South, who usually had sunburned necks from being outside all day and, having to work. You worker, why don't you go work some more?
This is literally the only explanation she gives about the origins of the word. Being that over time the word has historically been used across racial lines to describe these people, it was never really racialized until we get into modern times where the term has been expanded to be used in similar fashion to that of white trash. It's used plenty by people across racial lines, but always directed strictly at white people. This word is a bit fuzzier on the issue of being racist or not, but if the word nigger has taught us anything about the use of certain terms, it all comes down to who is saying it, who it's being said to, and why. If a white person says nigger when directed at a black person, it's automatically considered a racist term. If a black person says nigger to another black person, it falls into a more positive inside joke kind of context. Similarly then, it could be argued that when a white person calls another white person redneck, it would be in the more positive inside joke context, while if a black person calls a white person redneck, it can be very easily be considered racist. As in that scenario, it is pretty much universally used with a negative connotation. Moving on then.
All of these terms are rooted in classism, and since classism and racism often go hand in hand,
they often don't really. Classism, created via wealth and therefore privilege, crosses all racial lines. Be the wealthy black, white, Hispanic, Asian, or whatever else. The poor, and therefore less privileged, are seen universally through a negative lens. When you are wealthy and upper class, it's not race that is the focus of one's disdain of the less fortunate. It's simply the fact that they are poor. Wealth has the strange effect of being quite racially fair, to be honest, painting one's perceptions to view all the poor as the same fuzzy mess of gray.
You might be wondering, why didn't this oppressed underclass of poor white people join forces with the oppressed black people? Well, at one time, they actually did, and the white elites were terrified that these groups would eventually overthrow the existing power structure, because that almost happened.
And it could very well happen again in modern times. Wealth and income disparity is a colorblind issue. It doesn't matter what the color of one's skin is. Anyone can be wealthy, anyone can be poor, and anyone can experience the privileges or lack thereof of each category. If a class-based uprising were to occur in this country, it wouldn't be an issue of race, with one uprising being poor blacks and one being poor whites, and then there's the poor Hispanics over there, etc. It would be an extremely diverse single group. Just the poor.
During Bacon's Rebellion, white property owner Nathaniel Bacon united slaves, indentured servants, and poor whites in an uprising against the upper class. Together, they burned down the Virginia Capitol.
Somehow I think you're moving us off track on the original question of this video. I'm still waiting to see how this history lesson on how classism and racism don't go hand in hand, whereby classism supersedes racism in allowing people of every color to rise up against a privileged elite, has anything to do with whether or not cracker, white trash, and redneck are racist terms, even though we've already established that they are.
Ah, Bacon, bringing people together since the beginning of time.
That's another item for the grocery list.
They eventually lost, but instead of realizing that oppressing people was horrible and that everyone deserved to be treated like a human being, the upper class instead stopped having white servants altogether and only relied on slaves. To make matters worse, they literally invented militia jobs for poor white people to police slaves.
An example of how, yet again, the wealthy, privileged elites use the less fortunate to their own benefit and pit them against one another in an attempt to encourage the poor of every color to focus on hating each other in order to keep the poor's ire away from themselves. Sound familiar, doesn't it? Doesn't it? This next bit just basically explains what I just covered, so we'll zip through it.
As a child, there was growth. This not only eliminated the risk of slaves for whites, but it also meant poor whites suddenly had direct stake in the racism of slavery. Poor whites working their rock, and unfortunately, this strategy worked for most of American history. Yep.
Yup.
So are terms like cracker, white trash, and redneck racist? Well, no. They've been racialized, but they're not racist.
Please feel free to explain the difference, Francesca. Be mindful now. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this.
They were created and used by rich white people to disparage poor white people.
I distinctly remember you saying about white trash that
as a way for Southern house slaves to disparage poor whites.
oh snap.
Got him! Got him!
Not because they were white, but because they were poor.
Because you don't have to be black to be hated by rich white people, and you don't have to be white to be hated by rich black people, or vice versa, etc., etc.
And while racism and classism often overlap, racial prejudice frequently exists outside of class. Remember, you can change your class, but you can't change your race.
Because your race is something you are born as, which no one has any control over. Your class can be changed because anyone can get rich, and anyone can get poor. Class doesn't have a genetic factor. And of course racism exists outside of classism. In fact, it exists completely separate from classism. People of different races will hate other races for countless reasons, and same with people of different classes. But simply being poor or being wealthy doesn't create racism. People are racist regardless of class, and people are classist regardless of race.
Wealthy and accomplished people of color still encounter racism.
So do wealthy and accomplished white people. See previous point. Racism exists regardless of wealth and class.
Just a few years ago, multi-billionaire Oprah Winfrey was in an upscale shop in Switzerland and was told she probably couldn't afford one of the pricey handbags she was looking at. That's because the shop attendant just saw a black woman in the store and not mother Oprah.
Which could easily be chalked up to the fact that Oprah isn't anywhere as big a name in Europe as she is in North America. There are plenty of other possible nuances that could be involved. It was an upscale shop, so anyone walking in will be judged to see if they look like they can afford it. What was Oprah wearing? What kind of accessories did she have on? Was she very well dressed, or was she looking a bit schlumpy that day because she didn't care to spend the time that morning improving her appearance? There are a lot of different possibilities for this, and so ignoring that and instead blaming it entirely on the fact that Oprah is black is rather intellectually dishonest.
But look, I'm not giving anyone a pass on name calling. Even though these insults aren't racist, it doesn't mean they aren't hurtful. And that's because they promote a long history of class-based bias. Classism of any kind is divisive and takes attention away from the real problem, that people are still struggling all over while the rich get richer.
Classism will always be a problem, Francesca. The history of classism is the history of human civilization. As we covered earlier, however, the history of the words are fine to take into consideration. Nothing wrong with that. But it's the modern use and context that is of the concern here. And all of these terms in today's world can be paralleled with other racial terms and slurs, like nigger, spick, jigaboo, nignog, wetback, sand nigger, and porch monkey. Oh yeah, trigger warning or something, I guess. They're all definitely racialized, and all can be used to disparage and insult others strictly on the basis of race. Sorry to say, Francesca, but while the historical context of these words may be based in class, in the modern context they are used on the basis of race. These words, cracker, white trash, and redneck, are no different than the ones I spoke earlier. Racism, just like classism, sexism, ageism, and every other ism out there, are all two-way streets which anyone from any side of them can think, feel, believe, or act upon. These words, they are all of them racist.